Good evening from Hong Kong. I'm Alice Wong, Executive Director of Asia Society Hong Kong Center. I am delighted that we are able to bring you episode 20, COVID-19 update. We have started this series in February and we're celebrating a milestone, episode 20. And we're delighted that today we have three distinguished, in about a minute, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful president, Josette Sheeran, President and CEO of Asia Society, who's joining us from New York. And before we get started, I just want to thank all of you for joining us, and also especially thank Professor Peter Piot, who was our guest, episode 5, when we got started with this COVID update. And it was exactly 5 months ago that he joined us, and he'll tell us in his journey this last 5 months has been really full of recovery, and we're really delighted to see all three recover of COVID-19 joining us tonight for tonight's program, Facts from Hong Kong and Beyond, Recovery from COVID, Resolve, Resilient, Reflection in the Personal Struggle with COVID. And just before we get started, there will be, I think Josette will be making the closing, but I just want to let people know we will continue episode 21 on August 28th, and we will be talking about mental health impact of COVID. And episode 22, we already have confirmed Professor Gigi Gronwald of Johns Hopkins University, who will be talking to us about antibody testing. So join us August 28th and September 3rd for episode 21 and 22. And with that, I want to turn it over to our president, Josette Sheeran, to get the program started. Thank you for joining us.
I want to thank you, Alice, and I want to thank the Hong Kong Center for taking the lead in the Asia Society Global Network on the issue of COVID and doing programming early on to help the world understand the challenge it was going through. We know now there's been more than 20 million confirmed cases, and there have been nearly 750,000 people have died, and good news, 12.5 million recovered. And today we have three of us who have been through this experience. I will say there's many things to talk to this incredible two gentlemen here about, but today we're going to talk about the personal experience with COVID, and I'm really honored to join them. I'll share some of my own experience. I think each of our experiences have been very different, but have some similarities, and hopefully extract some wisdom along the way as the world continues to deal with this challenge. I'll introduce our speakers as we start, but I'm going to start with the oldest of our COVID triplets here. So Warren Mok, who is world-renowned singer, known as one of China's three tenors, as we call it, and someone who has brought so much joy to so many of us with his voice. One of the first questions he asked upon being diagnosed was checking whether his voice was still there. That would be a loss to the world, Warren. We're very glad to hear. And if at any point you want to break into song to prove to us your voice is still there, we welcome it. My personal favorite is you performing All I Ask of You. So one line, prove to us your voice is still there. But Warren, you have told your story. You were in New York, you weren't wearing a mask, you were traveling home to Hong Kong, you went through Bangkok to stop for a bit of a holiday, stopped in the airport, your temperature taken. It was a low temperature, but that's where it was caught. So why don't you tell us your story, which unfolded on March 17th.
Yes.
How you learned and what you did.
Yes, okay. I was in New York for a business trip, spent like eight days there. And during my time in New York, that time right before the outbreak in New York, so I was everywhere. I was at the Metropolitan Opera, saw an opera there, and went to Broadway shows, went to bars, restaurants, all without mask because nobody was wearing mask. If I wore one mask, people would think that I was sick. So I wouldn't even dare to consider to wear a mask. So then, I felt fine and had great time in New York and see shows, went to very great restaurants. And then the nightmare came when I landed in Bangkok, as I said, and tested, my temperature was a little bit high, 38.2. in Celsius, 38.2. That's a little bit fever. And they stopped me right there at the airport. So you can't go anywhere. We have to test you right away. Do the throat test, the saliva test. And I waited for 10 hours at the airport and then came back. Okay, you will confirm COVID-19 positive. So they took me from the airport directly to the hospital in an ambulance. So I didn't see anything about Bangkok, although I've been there many times. But this time, I was taking a vacation, So no vacation, from airport to the hospital, and stayed at the hospital for 3 weeks. Yeah. And okay, I would say my first experience in the hospital, for the first 2 days, the doctor said, oh, you have very mild symptoms, no problem. No need to have any medications. So I didn't take anything. But after the third day, my temperature went a little bit higher, like 38.4. And my symptom was headache and low fever, but no sore throat, no coughing, no breathing problems. None of that, thank God. So then they gave me heavy dosage of all the medications available for COVID-19 then. I remember I took like 7 different kind of medications, 7, including one Chinese medicine. Interesting enough, because in Thailand, in Bangkok, you could find Chinese doctors, Chinese medicine. So I took that as well, Chinese medicine and all the Western medicines as well. And after 1 week, my symptoms were gone and I was all right already. I felt fine. And then comes another nightmare. My test kept on being positive for quite a long time, for 2 more weeks in Bangkok, just waiting for the result to be tested negative before I could go back to Hong Kong. If you tested positive, you cannot be allowed to fly. And so that waiting period, 14 days, didn't have much symptoms anymore. I was fine, and just wait for the test result. So I got finally one day negative, so I could fly back to Hong Kong the next day. But very strangely and ironic, when I landed in Hong Kong, got another test at the airport. The next day, the health department called me in Hong Kong. Sorry, you tested positive. So I had to be back to the hospital for another 10 days in Hong Kong. During that 10 days, just waiting for the virus, like shedding, I think. It's not really contagious anymore. But 10 days in the hospital again, without any medication, just testing every day. So all in all, I think I've been tested more than 20 times for COVID-19. 26 days in the hospital in total. That was my experience.
Okay.
And luckily, my case wasn't so severe. So, I tried my voice. Even though I was in the hospital, I had the voice the whole time. So after I came out, my first interview, I was singing a song to the reporters in Hong Kong. So they broadcast on the TV as well.
Well, be prepared, because before we end the program, we just want proof that it's still working.
No problem. So to sum it up, I think if you test it early enough, then COVID-19 is curable. As long as you don't have any complications, don't have any other disease, then it's okay. It's not that. I think you both experienced it. I don't think it's so scary. In my case, I have confidence I would get better, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Warren, and you raise many important things. We'll come right back to you. I want to turn now to my friend and my colleague, Peter Piot. We have with us one of the world's great public health experts. And I first got to know Peter Piot when I joined his board when he was head of UN AIDS in 2007. And he was leading and marshaling the world to fight HIV/AIDS throughout the world, particularly in the developing world, where the resources and the access to medicines were very limited at the time. Much of that turned around under your leadership, Peter. You're also a microbiologist. You're also head of the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, an incredible leader who has fought epidemics his whole life. And like me, I've done much of this work too, was shocked to become one of the victims of this. So Peter, tell us a bit of your experience. I also want to mention that you're the advisor to the President of the European Commission on COVID. So even as you fought and all of us watched, really praying for your recovery, we know you were continuing to help advise the world. So thank you for that. And you, 2 days later, were diagnosed. So Warren on March 17th, you on March 19th.
Right, yes. Oh, so great to see you, Josette, and see you in such, you're looking so great. And Warren also, I'm a big admirer of you because I'm a big opera fan, but also I sang myself a bit in a band, but I can't sing anyway. COVID.
Rock and roll, rock and roll.
Yes, rock and roll. Yes, indeed. It's it starts actually a little bit earlier. On the 17th of March, we had decided to all work remotely in our in our school, university, before the government had imposed that, because we felt that the virus was spreading already. So I instructed everybody to work remotely. So that's what I did. And on the 19th, indeed, in the evening, I developed like high fever. It was 38 and a half, with a splitting headache. And suddenly I felt like exhausted, very, very, and had myalgia. So all my muscles and my joints were, painful. But indeed, like Warren said, no coughing, no shortness of breath, absolutely not. And I didn't really meet the case definition. But I kind of thought, this is it, for some reason. But because I've basically never been seriously ill in my whole life. I've been lucky. I'm 71, so I'm in the high risk category now, which is an interesting feeling to have. I'm the oldest of us here, and so that went on and on. But I continued to work. I'm kind of a workaholic, and then. Because we went through this transition to organize everything, also the teaching to go online, to etc. And but every day got worse. And in contrast to you, Warren, having access to tests in London, the UK, was extremely difficult, very difficult. So it was total chaos, to say the least. Very, very badly organized, and. So, and in the public system, we have quite a decent National Health Service. However, it was not possible to be tested because I did not meet the case definition. So in the end, I got tested through a friend in a private clinic, and that was only a week later, and it was positive. And that's the only test, that really I had initially. And then things got worse. I mean, every day was a bit worse, particularly splitting headache. In the end, I could hardly move my head and I could hardly sleep. Temperature stayed up. And so then I, couldn't sleep and all that. And so in the emergency room, they diagnosed me with, bacterial pneumonia I had. But also my test was already negative by then, which is quite typical. And Warren, you're quite an interesting case. I'm a physician also. So I that you stay positive that long, because in most cases, people 5 days, 7 days. So I was negative, and so they said, "Oh, but you don't have it." I said, "Excuse me, here is my test result." I was PCR positive for coronavirus, and then, but then what was interesting also is that they checked my oxygen levels. Oxygen saturation level, as it's called, you can measure it with you put your finger. Yeah. And I became obsessed by that afterwards to check it, and that was at 83%.
Wow.
And normally, normally most people have 98, 99, or at certainly over 95%. And so they looked at me, "How can you still breathe?" I said, "Well, I'm not short of breath. Believe me, we live in an old Georgian house, 200 years old, with 4 floors, and I go up and down the floors all the time. No problem." I was tired. So anyway, I was immediately put on oxygen with a mask and hospitalized. Heidi, my wife, was with me, and so she saw me, and you go into full isolation, as you know, and for 7 days. I was there with 3 other men who were also isolated and with COVID-19. And we, my symptoms didn't get better for several days. But then after a week, fortunately, my oxygen saturation was, 92, 93. And I was very happy with that. But I got antibiotics for my bacterial pneumonia and also some anticoagulants, so a blood thinner, which I think was probably one of the most important things I got. Fluids and high flow oxygen. And I was so happy that I was not put on a ventilator, because that was my biggest fear. Because we know today that even if you're totally healthy and you're put on a ventilator, there's some mortality there. So it was really high flow oxygen that saved my life, basically, plus probably the anticoagulants. So then I went back home, and in the meantime, London was in lockdown, and I kind of insisted to take the overground, the tube. You can say that's crazy, but I really wanted to see green, the air, and be free in a sense. And there was, I took the overground, and there was basically one other person in a huge train. So, and I had a mask, so I was not risky for anybody. I came home, and it was really decompensation. So fortunately, I could communicate with my wife and my kids through, FaceTime and so on, and WhatsApp. And I was thinking, if this would have happened 10 years ago, I don't know when all this video conferencing started, but it's not that much older than that. Would have been, or 30 years ago, 20 years ago, no mobile phone. So, and there are some places in the world where people don't have that. So I felt, okay, at least I could communicate. So, and I thought it was over. I was still very tired and so on. But then 1 week later, I started becoming short of breath. Oh, one thing, one of you interesting, my voice became very hoarse. I mean, I could, it was like I was a heavy smoker or something like that, so, and I could only whisper. It was maybe on the one hand, lack of energy, being very weak, but also it was a direct impact of the infection. But then I got really worse and worse, and short of breath, extremely tired and so on. And I started coughing. And so then I went to another hospital where I was better treated, I must say. And they found that I had some kind of interstitial pneumonia. What is it? It is the reaction of the body. The inflammatory reaction is going in overdrive. And my lungs were, when you look at an X-ray, normally it's a kind of black with, and you see the bit of the heart and some bones and all that. It was all white. And so it was all kind of, the lung became stiffened. And that's why my oxygen saturation levels were back very low. But fortunately, then I wasn't hospitalized. I could go back home. My tests were still negative. So it was no longer the virus directly. And that went on for several months. So it took me 2 months to, getting out of bed was really tiring. I'm normally a pretty energetic type of guy. And I just couldn't. And I got very frustrated and a bit down also, because I thought, what can I do? But there was not much I could do. And so that's, but now I'm fine. I mean, but it took about 4 months to go more or less back to normal. That's, and I can go on forever, but that's
okay.
in a nutshell, yes.
Yeah, no.
Very important.
Peter.
There's always a silver lining.
Yeah.
I lost 7 kilos, and I've been trying through exercise and diet to lose weight. Never worked out, and now, and my appetite was gone, but now it's back, and I can enjoy good wine and good food again. So life is good.
Well, it's good to see you both healthy. I want to remind our viewers that you can register your questions. It's right on the website and the link there. And so if you go on slido.com, we're already getting a bunch of questions for our panel, and we'll get to those in just a moment. I'm going to give an overview of my experience. It's so different. and the fact that I contracted this 2 months later in an evolving new public health phenomenon where we didn't know much about this disease. It was a bit of night and day between March, what health professionals understood, and May. And today we know even so much more. And so just to recount a bit of my experience, Asia Society's global headquarters, we also did the same thing. We shut down in New York early March. Right at the beginning, we were working closely with Governor Cuomo to bring in PPEs from China to do an air bridge and help with our connections between the East and the West, between Asia and the US, bringing in over 30 million pieces of PPEs early on. But we were doing this all remotely from our kitchen tables like everyone else. And I decided early on to take my family, and we went to a small town in the West in the mountains that we love. I won't mention it because I'm going to say quite a bit of praise, but also quite a bit of challenges that were faced there in this. And there we, hold on, my computer is overheating there, I see. And there we holed up from March and never went back to New York because New York went into a real crisis, as all of you followed, early on in this, and came through and is now doing so much better. And I'm back in New York. But up in this town, we were very isolated, wore masks. I know public health. I have led the fight against an epidemic in Haiti on cholera, which we haven't had any cases in the past 20 months. Public behavior, the behavior of individuals can nail these epidemics. And so I will say we took a very strict attitude, as we have in our institution, to really follow the public health rules and get out of the way of the front lines. We know that hospitals get overtaxed, systems get overtaxed. So we went to a place where we wouldn't be that exposed. And I will say early on, and where we ended up, which I didn't expect, there was a defiance against masks. And it's very hard. The deal with masks, right, is it takes two to tango, right? If one person has a mask and the other doesn't, and that, we restricted our exposure, my family and I, but when you go to get food or something, you had some exposure. I guess that's how I got it. I had very little exposure, but I will just say that in mid-May, I took a hike every day. We could go on trails without exposure to anyone. And I felt like I had a flu, kind of. I had an annoying little cough. I had a headache, terrible headache, and my muscles were very weak. And I joked, oh, I have COVID. I really didn't think there was any possibility because we had very little exposure and it didn't feel that dramatic. But I felt really exhausted, and I spent a couple of days unable to take my daily hike. And 2 days later on Friday, I thought, I'm just going to go out and do a very gentle walk just to come back and get some fresh air. And about a half of a block in to this walk, I knew I was going to collapse and felt I was going to crack my head open on some rocks because every inch of my body was shaking like a leaf and I couldn't get oxygen. And I went back to the house and told my son, I don't know what's happening. I think I'm having a heart attack. I have no underlying conditions. And I said, my entire body was trembling from head to toe from just the slightest exertion. And we went into a small emergency room with amazing public health officials, I will say. And I came in and said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And they asked, and I said, I have a slight cough. They said, we're putting you in the COVID room. I said, this isn't COVID. And they said, we're putting you in the COVID room. And we got in there and they said, listen, everyone thought this was a lung disease. It's a blood disease. It's a blood clotting disease. New research is coming. Our little hospital, we spend all night doing the research because there isn't a proper flow of information, but we're studying what's happening and we're going to test you and your blood clotting factor. So there's an indicator called a D-dimer. I didn't know about this, that tests your clotting factor. In addition to the oxygen, mine, Peter, was like at 90. Everything else looked fine, but that blood clotting factor is supposed to be around 200-ish and came back over 1,000. And so they had me immediately do a CAT scan and chest x-rays, thinking they'd find blood clots, because now I think there's an understanding that this disease causes a massive production of blood clots, micro blood clots that clog your organs and block access to oxygen. It's not just that your lungs can't produce as much. And this is where I think the traveling of those blood clots, Peter's the physician expert here, he could sort through this, but could produce embolisms that could go to your heart or to your brain, causing the strokes. Everything people read about was strokes. I literally had not read these articles, and when they tested that and saw that blood clotting factor, there were no pulmonary embolisms from the CAT scan. And so I think very wisely, my house was 15 minutes from the emergency room. They sent me home and said, come in if there's any slight change, but we don't want you on a ventilator. The news was already coming in that, Peter, you had picked up early on, that they're not necessarily helping people, the ventilators. And so they, to test your oxygen, to be at home, and I was glad to go home for a week. I will tell you that there's something out there that people talk about, which is the COVID cliff that happens on day 13-ish, after 10. And I thought a week later, Friday would be day 13. And I said to my son and my family there, wow, I've made it past the cliff. Today's day 13. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. I think I'm getting, coming back. And about a half an hour later, I was doubled over in such pain. I felt like someone had stabbed me with a 10-inch knife, like right in the chest. And my son said, get in the car, we're going to the emergency room. And lo and behold, I had a pulmonary embolism. So these blood clots were moving, sitting right next to the aorta to my heart. And they caught it right away and put me on blood thinners, which, as Peter said, was not the protocol, and even then was not the protocol. But these doctors said they were flying on their own. They had to make judgments to be able to address what they were seeing in the reality on the front lines of the medical care. And those blood thinners, I believe, really saved my life, because within 2 days, that cliff, and I could feel my body falling off, literally a health cliff, began to turn around, and I've steadily improved since then. So I really just want to say here, for all those who have lost family members, it is terrible. And Peter, you and I plugged in on this to talk with each other. No one wants to be a medical experimenter on the front lines of something like this when we don't have full knowledge. And for all of us, we felt what it feels like to be exposed, where doctors really don't know and don't know exactly what to do, and they're doing their best. And so to the public health professionals out there who have felt alone, or they haven't had the information, or they haven't had the tools, I think all of us have seen, the miraculous job many of them have done, and also how frustrating it's been for family members who can't speak on the ventilator and lose, that precious time. And, that now we have more tools in the toolkit. So I'm going to stop there with my experience. I just have a couple of questions. So Warren, you were not on the ventilator also?
No need.
So, this experience that we have, I think, Peter, when I talked to you in June, when I felt a little better, you were feeling better, you said 6 months from now, we'll know a lot more. Right now, we don't know. And even I think for Peter and I, who both went on the blood thinners, we don't know how long. There are no set protocols, even with these medications that we've been taking. So a number of the questions that have come in have been about, once you recover, are you still on medications? What is the path? And I just want to ask you both that. Are you still on the medications? What do you think you know about keeping yourself healthy? Warren, you want to go first?
For me, no. I stopped medication actually after I was in the hospital in Bangkok, the number 10th day. Then the doctor said, you don't need to take anything, just let the virus shedding by itself. That took me like 4 weeks total, so like 6 weeks I was in the hospital. And ever since then, I didn't take any medications. And I kept exercising every day and singing. I felt fine, really. I mean, did not affect me anything like after effects. Not really. I exercise actually more now than before. More self-conscious about health. Yeah. I go to the gym every day. Before I would go once a week. Now every day I do liftings and things like that. So I don't feel anything like affecting my voice or my health. Thank goodness for that. Yeah.
And how about you, Peter?
Yeah, it's a bit different. Well, I was on very high doses of steroids, so it's a prednisolone, and so intravenously for several months, and that was probably really important to get rid of, to suppress the immune response, and so that my lungs could clear, and that has happened. So that's finished. But I'm still on blood thinners, and the doctor said now that it's probably going to be for the rest of my life, which I find a bit depressing. But anyway, it's preventing stroke, But it's. I was thinking, you said there are about 20 million people who had infection. It's probably closer to 100 million or more, because so many have not been detected.
Yeah.
Yep. And Peter, you just froze for a second there, and you're still frozen. I'm going to ask you, Warren. You have said that without health, you are nobody.
Yep, absolutely.
So it sounds like you've come to a newfound appreciation of the importance of health.
Absolutely. Before I got COVID-19, I was quite a healthy person. I hardly got a cold or fever or anything. Like, I think the last time I got a fever, I don't even remember when I got a fever. So normally I enjoy food. I eat a lot healthy, and singing is very good exercise, actually. Singing is healthy, especially all kind of singing is bel canto, use a lot of breathing and then, singing loudly and like that. So for me, before I didn't, I never thought I would get infected by COVID-19. Really, seriously. I was like, I didn't want to wear a mask. Even it was in Hong Kong, people started to wear masks on the street. I didn't want to wear it. I said, no, I'm fine. I'm strong. No way I'll get infected. That's why, I didn't wear that mask. And that's why I got infected. So for the people who still are not willing to wear masks, I advise you to do so, because that really helps, really preventing this virus spreading.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, welcome back. I was just asking Warren about his statement that without health, you are nobody. I think this newfound appreciation and awareness about health. One thing that has struck me, that in an epidemic, Peter, you have lived on the front lines of epidemics. I have quite a bit in my previous work around the world and my current work. It seems to me there's two possible approaches to an epidemic. Either the government controls everything, or individuals take responsibility for behavior. And I think sometimes we underestimate how much power an individual has over their health sovereignty, right? With the choices they make. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Because we've seen whole nations turn around with a hand washing campaign, as you know. And sometimes we take the basics for granted. And just as Warren's saying, wow, a mask can, prevent suffering for yourself and others.
No, I totally agree. First, I should say also, just like Warren, I know exercise every day, which before was only the weekend. So, I mean, there is a positive, behavior change in myself, and I think I'll continue to do that. Also because I was never ever really sick, so I took for granted that I was healthy, and now I know it's not the case. So that's one thing, but and that probably is a good thing for whatever comes next, because there will be other issues and getting older and so on, but also other epidemics. But I agree with you, Josette. the government is important, and there need to be policies and structures in place for testing and what have you. But also it's individual behavior, our collective individual behavior. As Warren said, every single person wears a mask, where there are other people, then frankly, this, and washes hands, keeps some distance. I mean, this virus has no chance. But as soon as people are a bit closer, they will jump on it. I have no idea how I got infected because of my job and my personality. I have a pretty active personal life and social life, and restaurants and giving talks, COVID and on other things, and meeting with students, with faculty, with media and so on. So I don't know, it could have been any of these places. But no, we need, very worried about in some countries that there are this protest against wearing masks, that there are demonstrations even. So in Europe we have it. It's just like people who refuse to give vaccines to their kids, this anti-vax movement, that's going to kill a lot of people. And what's very worrisome is that vaccine is now, frankly, our only real hope to get out of this epidemic, because this virus will not go away one fine day. But yet, surveys show that up to 50% of people say, I won't take that vaccine, not me. So, I hope
50,
we will.
50 or 15%?
50.
Globally.
Yeah, no, that's in the US. In Britain, it's 1 in 4. 25%. In France, a bit higher. I mean, these figures may change once the vaccine is really there, but we shouldn't take it for granted. And right. That's also, again, your point. It's not enough to have the technology. It's not enough to have the government policies. It's our collective responsibility. And I still remember, first time ever I went to Japan was in 1981 or so. And I saw people wearing a mask in the street. And I said, what's going on here? Are they paranoid? They're germaphobes or so? And then someone told me, no. This is an act of community responsibility, of caring about others. When you have a cold, when you, whatever, you cough, you cover your mouth and your nose, and that's how you protect others. And that's the kind of cultural behavior change that we need to know. Probably handshaking is gone forever. We all that. Wearing masks when we have something, that should be part of our culture, even when COVID is over.
Yeah. And Peter, it seems almost unbelievable, and Warren, that if you look back in history, when we see the pictures and drawings of these epidemics that have plagued humanity and terrorized humanity, you see those masks with the long cone, that we're still back to the basics. Like, I think there's some kind of perception the public has that it must be much more sophisticated than putting on a mask to be able to prevent a horrible, microbe from entering you. But it seems like our ancestors knew something about preventing the spread of disease.
Yeah, I think so too. As Peter was saying that, you were saying that about the government, either the government or the individual take actions. I think for that, the Chinese government, now I'm in mainland China, in Guangzhou, the health code system is really working. Everybody has a health code in the iPhone, in the iPhone. So everywhere you go, you can be traced where you have been. And in case someone gets sick, you get informed right away. Or if you get sick, they know right away. It's
so there's an app, like a tracing app?
Yep, a tracing app and a health code app in everybody's iPhone. And the health code. Yeah. So everywhere you go, they know. Because iPhone, is very easy to tracing. So no matter where you are in each city, even in which district, it shows on iPhone. Well, of course, some say, okay, no privacy for that. But for the pandemic right now, you need some kind of strict system to control this virus. Give and take. So right now, mainland China is controlling really well. The whole country is free now, free to travel. But everybody's really wearing masks. Even in the shopping mall, temperature check and mask. Everywhere you go. In a hotel, temperature check and mask. So it's working. It's working.
No, I agree. I mean, some other countries like Korea also did the same thing, and so. But I think in China it is part of your phone. You don't have to apply for it. I think that is really key. So you don't. That's good. But you're right, Josette. When you think of it, the current measures are not more sophisticated than in medieval times for the plague. And even in these days, then they didn't know that there were microbes, viruses, and what have you. But the concepts were absolutely the same. The big difference today,
miasma, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes, miasma and so on. And I'm here, and not far, since you know the rise in Provence, there is somewhere Le Mur de la Peste, the wall of the plague, where the plague wall, where they try to build a wall to stop the plague from moving from Marseille to this part of Provence. Of course, it didn't work. Walls have never worked, but these measures that we described, they work. And the big difference today is, of course, that we hopefully will have a vaccine, and then we can protect ourselves. But we're not there yet. We still have to go quite a way.
And we have the questions coming in. So I'm going to pivot to that. So Peter, we have a question from the United States. How has your experience changed the way you think and speak about broader public health challenge of COVID going forward?
Well, my whole professional life, I've kind of tried to make life of viruses miserable. So fighting viruses. So now a virus did the opposite. And it gave me a different perspective, because in my mother tongue is Dutch, and we have an expression, it's called ervaringsdeskundige. It means an experienced expert. It is someone who has gone through it. We know in medicine, for example, the groups of women who are survivors of breast cancer, people with HIV, the same. So you bring the personality. So because this is about people. Communication of governments is often about, flattening the curve. It's about statistics and so on. And certainly in the UK, it is rarely about people. So I've been speaking up and say this about people. Secondly, it's not just a mild flu, or you end up in intensive care and you die. There's a lot in between. So we need to also think of a holistic approach. It's not just because it's a respiratory a virus that it's only affecting the lungs. We talked about that, and Josette had it, and me too. Cardiovascular, but it can affect your kidneys and your brain. It can provoke diabetes. Just name it. And I felt that it was in every single cell. I also trembled and so on. It was like everywhere. Very strange. But also it made me double determined to fight it off. But I think that we have to consider that we're only at the beginning of this epidemic, and that we really need to start thinking of societies living with COVID. It's not going to go away. Even, let's say China, other countries, New Zealand, thought it had wiped it out. They have new cases. So we can't lock down societies forever all the time, We'll all become extremely poor. So what is the trade-off? How are we going to manage that, in a society that's under the threat of these viruses? And there's all this technology, that's one thing, but also the cultural differences that we just discussed.
Right. And Warren, just focusing on those cultural differences, because human behavior very much is linked to the way we view society and how we're organized. And you've talked about tracking is so tight, and we see that, more so throughout some of like Hong Kong, early on registering if you enter a building. Peter and I come from the roots of the unruly West. And I think the Dutch always have a pioneering spirit. They like to go and be, out there. And certainly in the US, this sense of wanting not to have the government track and lay the rules down. So you have a big stage. What would you say to the world about all of this? I mean, we can imagine a world, right, that's safe, even with all of our glorious differences, but how do we approach this?
I think in this kind of pandemic, this virus, we should forget about ourselves. Let's concentrate to fight virus together, no matter what race, where you're from, what country, what your political view is, but have to consolidate the power to overcome this pandemic, because this is really killing and affecting the whole human race. Doesn't matter where you are, the whole global is a global big issue. As we all know, said 20 million, as Peter said, maybe 100 million people affected, you never know, it's never counted. So we should put all the things aside and let the government, let the scientists, let the doctors do their job.
So Peter, let me ask you this, because you've spent your life talking to the public about challenges. And right now with COVID, we have to talk to each other about how we're going to approach this, because we are in it together. I just got sent a meme yesterday that was showing that in the West in general, the whole organizing idea is to protect the individual against the collective. And in the East, it's more to protect the collective against the individual.
Yep.
Like if you look at organizing ideas of society. So where do you see differences in the West of how we're interpreting, individual freedom and action? And how would you talk to societies that very much, individuals want to have their own space to make their own decisions and not be tracked, for example?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say I couldn't agree more with what Warren said. In this kind of situations, it's not me, myself, and I, because that's a disaster. It's us, and it's the we, and we need the collective. We need to forget ourselves, and it's the community. And I think that I grew up in a community where the interest of the community, of the family, was actually number one. But that's also some time ago. This was in rural Belgium, Flanders, and so that was how in that spirit I was grown up. But that's today. It's we're very much into individual selves and identities, and I think that's a big handicap. It has also advantages. There's no doubt about that. You can be yourself and express if you're not exactly the same as everybody else, if you are non-average, let's put it that way. So that's, I would say, a plus. But when it comes to dealing with big crises, with epidemics or other crises, that's not very helpful. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not a communication specialist, but I think that's really a key question. And and I hope that we will get to the point in the West where the collective good will prevail before there's millions of people will die, because frankly that's the choice we have. And it's very hard, the conversations with people who are against masks. It's in the US it's perhaps sometimes more political statement. In Europe it's more libertarian. It's my right, and who's going to tell me what I should do? But people at least now, we all wear seatbelts. There was also opposition to that. But I think we need to involve far more social scientists, people in the communication business. And this is not just the doctors. It's not only about more information. And that's why I stress so much that we need some cultural change in order to be more resilient as societies, as communities, for this epidemic, because it's going to go on for months, if not years, and also for the other one, the next one, and for other things that are going to come up, the results of climate change and so on. So I'm a strong believer in that, but I'm a bit of a minority in my own world.
Well, listen, you both make really excellent points on this. And sometimes people say, this is new, we haven't confronted this. But I remember back to the beginning of the fight against HIV/AIDS, for example. Yeah. In highly developed societies where we have not felt that vulnerable to microbes, right? Science and medicine had advanced so far, and human behavior changed in a way that really brought those numbers way down. And I don't think at the beginning of that fight, we could have imagined that. And throughout the world, you see different societies adapting behavior to nail that terrible disease and to really get those numbers down. So I think actually we have, in very recent history, a very good example. Would you two agree with that?
Well, maybe I'll start here because that's a lot of my life was about that. Absolutely. And in fact, the biggest successes in bringing down new infections in many societies was before there were any drugs, any treatment. We still don't have a vaccine. But on the other hand, there are also still about 600,000-700,000 people who die from AIDS every year. It's not over. But it's really thanks to collective behavior change. But at the moment, there is some complacency. It's a bit like no longer wearing a mask, no longer wearing a condom. When you think it's over, people don't die anymore. So it is. That's why these things, these behaviors have to become part of our kind of normal behavior, our collective behavior. Take smoking. Today in most societies, smoking in public or in a group of friends or in a house, that's absolutely not very popular anymore. That's no longer, let's say, cool. When I was a teenager, that was the cool thing to do, was smoking. So behavior change is possible, absolutely. And I think HIV is a good model also for other things. For example, that we made sure that once treatment was available in high-income countries in the West, mostly, we fought very hard to make sure that the same drugs that save lives can become available for people in poor societies. But that took years and years. And we must make sure that when there's a treatment for COVID, or when there's a vaccine particularly, that it's going to be accessible for everybody who needs it, regardless of how wealthy or poor they are.
Very good point. We have about 8 minutes left. We have more questions. One of the things, Warren, that one of the questioners wants to know is about your emotional ups and downs. Bring us into how you dealt with that. And I think for anyone facing a diagnosis or uncertainty, particularly something that could affect your career, all of that, how did that go? And did you find particular challenges on that front?
To me, as an opera singer, the first thing I worry about is how my lungs are, because we breathe with lungs a lot, very important. So when I got diagnosed as a positive, so I asked the doctor, how's my lung? He said, okay, nothing yet. He said, nothing yet. It's okay, still all right. And then after the third day, he said, a little bit something, maybe some infection in the lungs. So then the doctor gave me medication right away for my lungs. So I think I would have to thank the doctors in Thailand. They really treated me really well and everything in time. So they give me the antibiotic for the lungs to prevent having pneumonia. So for that, and when I asked the doctor, my lungs are okay, then I felt much better because, without my lungs, even only the throat, I can't sing, can't breathe, can't sing. And that's most, as a singer, we worry about the vocal cords and the lungs. And after I got okay, I'm all fine with that. Then there's big relief. I know I can sing again. My career is not ended. This is very important. I know many of my colleagues got COVID-19, like Placido Domingo, Bocelli, famous tenors. They all recovered. So it's okay, I'm a tenor. I got recovered. So actually, as long as being diagnosed early, that's the key. Don't wait, later. Then you go to hospital to check. So the testing, the early testing is the key as well. Yeah. Get a test as early as possible.
Yeah. And Peter, just to keep going through these questions, you can jump in on that too. But do we all have immunity now? What do we know about this?
Well, first, the good news maybe is that there are no confirmed cases of people who got it twice. So it's a bit, let's not forget, this is only 7-8 months that it's among us, this virus. So it's hard to imagine a world before, but that's the way it is. So, but up to now, there have been reports in the media, but none of them was really confirmed. So that suggests that there is protective immunity. The question will be how long. And frankly, if there would be no protective immunity, then a vaccine will also be extremely difficult to make. It's just like for HIV. So I think we can assume that, but the main question will be how long will we be protected for those of us who, you know. Okay. But for example, we are the safest people on earth now. We should not be. If you would have like precision public health to say so, we should be able to travel all over the place. We can't infect anybody. We cannot be infected. But I understand that you need kind of public health measures.
Well, I'm all for having dinner with the three tenors, Placido and Warren and Kelly. Yes. Peter, maybe you and I could be special guests at that one.
Yeah. I've seen two of them, but not you yet, Warren. But no, I'm a big opera fan, so I really looking forward to it.
Wonderful.
Yes. So let me ask this. One of Joanna is writing a question asking, are there periodic tests that have to happen? So let me just say this. When I got tested in the hospital, it took 5 days to get the results. They came back negative. My doctor said there's 60 to 70% false negatives. They diagnosed it at COVID because the test was unreliable. I got the one, that goes up your nose to 7 inches or whatever that is. And the people in my household were refused tests, even though I had this, because there was such a shortage and they weren't in a risk group. Still, New York now really has its act together. You can get a free test right away, but it's taken a long time here at least. So I hear, Peter, you're obsessively still testing your oxygen. What kind of tests do you think you need to continue to have, or do you continue to need to have tests, and what would they be? And just quick answers, because we have 3 minutes.
Just as Warren said, I think access to testing early on is really absolutely key, but the systems are not in place. In the UK, it's still difficult to get testing. For example, my wife, she couldn't get access to testing because she was asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. It's the same as your family. I think we need to test. We could also test far more for international travelers, because that could solve some of the quarantine issues. You'll be tested like when you arrive at Bangkok airport, but the results are technically they can be there in an hour or 2 hours, and soon we'll have tests that are available in 10 minutes. So I think testing access is going to be absolutely key for controlling this epidemic, knowing where the outbreaks are and making it possible to go back to more or less normal life.
And Warren, a final note from you.
Oh, sole mio, che bello è. Oh, sole mio, stan pronte a te. Okay, it's all for O Sole Mio, like the sun.
Beautiful, beautiful. Listen, let me thank you two marvelous humans, and also express to you and your families how glad we are to all have come through this. And I can see we're all dedicated to really helping the world through this however we can, and taking what we've learned for good. And thank you, Asia Society Hong Kong, for your leadership on this issue. Thank you, Alice Mong. And Peter, if you want one note of rock and roll, we have 30 seconds left. I think he's been intimidated.
My opening song was The House of the Rising Sun, but I won't. Okay.
Maybe we can do it in person someday. Yes. A Warren Peter mashup.
We'll meet you in New York. Okay.
Yes. You're welcome to the Asia Society stage, both of you, and we'll do a celebration honoring those who have helped lead us through this struggle. So thank you, and thank you, Asia Society Hong Kong.
Thank you.
Thank you.